Hello. So I was just talking in Twitch chat with someone who was playing an IM playoffs match, and I just gave the not unwarranted but unasked for advice of just pop through a lot and just play to flip flop the point, or as a lot of people call it, leapfrog the point, just because that's like really strong in low divisions. And that got me thinking, and I kind of wanted to just talk about flip-flopping in general versus dry pushing. What is the difference? Why would you go for one over the other? And just kind of go from there. So, I mean, first things first, what is a flip-flop / leapfrog? Basically, in an ad situation, you ideally like to convert your ad either into a greater advantage, such as, let's say, by like killing their med. Well, you know, the greatest advantage of all. I'm about to sneeze. Oh, excuse me. Greatest advantage of all would be just to like wipe their team and have everyone on your team survive, right? So you either convert or grow your advantage, turn it into something even better, or convert your advantage into something actually tangible, like a point or space or something to that degree. So you're in an ad situation. Ideally, you want to get something with that ad. You don't want it just even out without you actually being able to get anything tangible or valuable out of it. So you want to push into the next point. And basically, you have two options to go about this. These two options fall along a gradient, but you either take the point while using or you take the point without using. Typically, if you take the point without using, that's called a dry push, right? Because you are not using your Uber, so the fight itself is considered dry, just some terminology. And then there is some in between where you might end up using because you got forced while attempting to dry push, either to spam or to a soldier sack or something to that extent. That's not really... It kind of plays out like a flip-flop, but it's not as good as one. You weren't planning for one. And then a flip-flop is where you are intending to use and then you pop through. And in most scenarios where you're flip-flopping the point, it's called a flip-flop because you're not expecting to necessarily catch their med and kill their med, meaning that medic is now going to have ad on you. So basically what you're doing is you're taking your Uber, you're popping through to cap, well, to get all the space on point, cap the point, and then play disad. Essentially just putting the ball in your opponent's court, putting it on them to mess up their push, and hopefully... you know, good things will come from that. So, I mean, what is the point of a flip-flop? Because it sounds like a very neutral situation, and you have ad, right? So you'd like to have something more permanent than just playing disad on the next point over. Well, what's good about it is it's a very simple plan to follow. It's very easy to do. You just pop through everyone else on the team that's not involved in the Uber, meaning like Pocket Soldier and your flank. They can just chill, and then based on the comms in the Uber, so let's say like players are caught, then maybe like Pocket Soldier can start getting in and try and catch those players with the Uber. Likewise, you know, flank can get in based on the comms and stuff like that. Very easy plan to follow. Everyone kind of knows what they're doing. On top of that, if you're good at playing it, you can basically turn it into an advantageous situation instead of just a generally even one. Assuming you don't even get any kills with the Uber, right? You just get the point. If you're like outbuilding the other team, if you play the disad better, like you play the spam better, your sacks might be a little better, you're more likely to force them when they're entering than you getting forced while entering. In long term, it might end up benefiting you. You might even be able to outbuild the opponents and then have things even out while you have control of the point long term, which is really good. And then on top of that, like, it's kind of just, I don't want to call it a gamble because in many respects it's very risk free. But It's kind of like, I don't want to, what is a good comparison here? You're basically just seeing what you can get, right? You're just rolling the dice, because sometimes players might be caught. And of course, you might recognize situations in which, off a fast transition, you expect people to be caught, in which case you might specifically go for that, which we'll talk about later, I suppose. But yeah, it's not going to be every time no one is caught. Sometimes you get a soldier kill, sometimes maybe a demo kill that you can keep pressuring forward off of. Maybe you get 2 picks on like a soldier scout, 2 scouts, 2 soldiers, anything like that. Suddenly you're no longer looking at a situation in which you're going to have to play this out on point. You're looking at a situation in which not only do you cap the point, but then you get to keep pressuring into the next point. And then depending on how they play that, you either can get a really good sack off while they're down 2 aggressively, or if they're really passive, they might even give up the next point. And if things go really well and your sack doesn't work out, then whatever. It's just another flip-flop situation that you were expecting to play anyway. You were comfortable with playing that disad on the point you just got. But this time around, you got the extra added bonus of getting a really good sack off in the meantime. So it does benefit you in that type of scenario. And then the one thing I'm not mentioning as well is you can just kill their medic and then it's still add, which is really important. When stuff like that happens, it can be huge. And this is where the lower division flip-flops are stronger kind of comes from. The fact that, you know, in lower divisions, people are less familiar with not only tracking Ubers and having that kind of intuitive idea of where they should be standing when, but their positioning overall is just worse. So a lot more medics and just players in general are going to be a lot more caught. And if you are capable of playing those flip-flop scenarios properly and even capable of like pressuring off of just getting picks but not getting the medic, then it's going to be a very, very potent option for your team. So yeah, flip-flops, pretty good. What is the alternative? Well, the alternative to a flip-flop, of course, is a dry push, as I was talking about earlier. So basically, what you're trying to do is take the point without using. And there's usually an order of events here. So you are expecting their combo to be somewhere where they're not caught. So let's look at, actually, let's look at Snakewater 2 as an example. So you're expecting their combo to be on bats, right? Not caught to anything. They can just back out if need be. And if like there was pressure or bridge, for instance, they could even back out left lobby. But combo, holding bats, not caught to anything. Maybe like you could even play bridge, which in my opinion is a little worse, but still. Point being, combo very far back. Their demo is likely going to have traps up somewhere. And let's say, oh, you know what? I can leak a really, really, really good trap to the 2 Wild for Rumpus viewers here. This guy right here. It was one that basically I would, if the player didn't know it existed, like in advance, if they weren't expecting it to be in that exact spot, then it just never got cleared. And I would even call to my team that I'm just getting a free drop lower if they're coming lower. But in any case, let's say I trapped up that, and let's say as a demo I had like a surplus of time and actually got to trap up both doors. And this is another good one here. Yeah, so let's say I have 2 really good traps up, and if I actually manage to get both of those up, then I would actually expect to get value on any type of dry fight. But anyway, so demo's going to have traps up and basically just be playing back for spam. And then, yeah, your medic and scout are going to be pretty passive as well. Soldiers are going to be more aggressive because soldiers are capable of jumping away and they kind of have a lot of health. So you're expecting soldiers closer on the door, like pipe, for instance. And basically, the way things work is these players that are defending are going to try to get as much spam as possible onto your combo, onto really whoever they can, but medic is obviously a big one. And then they're probably going to send a sack as well, because you don't want to just let them take the point for nothing. You may as well take that awkward positioning they have when they're in a doorway or have just gotten through a doorway but taken spam because of it. Basically, they're in an uncomfortable position of pushing into another point through usually pretty enclosed spaces, and you should take advantage of that and send a sack. If you're able. If you're like already down a player or down 2 players, then yeah, you probably don't want to just keep trickle feeding. But if everyone's alive, then yeah, definitely want a sack. So you should be looking out for that as well. And that usually means a soldier. For instance, I don't really know where both soldiers would play on this point. I don't have a ton of soldier experience, but one on the pipe is definitely something you see a lot. And then another, maybe even like baiting, playing spam lower, just playing for that bomb mostly, trying to stay healthy for that. So yeah, considering that is what we're looking at, that type of hold, basically the way a dry push works is you generally want to get your pocket soldier through first. And this is less pronounced on a map like Snakewater. Of course, it is point by point specific. But the usual order of operations is you get your pocket soldier in to not only have a cursory glance of if there's any like obvious traps in the door, right? They're going to be able to see them, but also just vision on players nearby. If there's anyone like obviously, let's say their demo is just like obviously feeding, just holding way too close, you're not going to be able to get through against a demo this close. Your pocket soldier is going to be landing on that guy with their bomb. But otherwise, that bomb is probably going to be fading, and that soldier is going to be living. And that is the space creation, because anyone who is threatened by getting landed on by that bomb is going to back up, give you space through the door, and then you can get through the door, start taking your space. Then you want your pocket scout getting through. They're going to do a more thorough clear of traps, so maybe check a trap in the rock they're going to be looking out for, stuff like that. And they're also going to be absolutely focused on the bombers, because that's a big deal. And then you can get your demo and your medic through after all that's said and done. And yeah, it's basically just on Snakewater in particular, mostly just looking out for that bomb once you get through the door, and you should be there. But you can see how there's like a lot of moving parts here that have to go in order and have to go correctly. That it can be kind of prickly. Like if there's, say, just a demo aggro on point, maybe he's not like so caught that a soldier can just land on him and kill him. Like he is full buff probably, but he's like spamming out your scout pretty nasty, and like stuff like that is kind of hard to gauge. Oh, do we just take the Uber? Is this demo really caught to it? It's kind of hard to get through. Like so many things can go wrong that it's a harder plan to follow. Now, I don't want to knock dry pushes entirely, because despite the fact that you are more vulnerable to like spam and to the slacks, and it's a harder plan to follow, it does have one like really big benefit, which is the fact that you preserve your Uber charge. You don't use it, meaning in a situation, well, is this something we're going to talk about? We are talking about it later. Yeah, we're going to talk about it right now, actually. Let's go on to the next point. When you might want to go, excuse me, when you might want to go for a dry push versus a flip-flop, or just a pop through. Basically, let's start with Uber margins. So if it is like really, really big ad, and let's imagine pushing into 2 here. If it's really big ad, then you would probably want to dry push, because if you can pull it off, then you have an ad push into last, right? And that's really important, because that's just a really strong chance of winning a round outright. So on second, like I might be much more inclined to try to dry in order to be able to take a push into last. And a lot of times you'll see when it is enough ad to take second and potentially take the Uber into last, you get a lot of fast transition Ubers that in all my like map reviews and stuff, I talk about fast transition stuff. This is exactly what I'm talking about. When you have enough ad to dry push into second and still take an Uber into last, but you want to be as fast as possible, right? Because that ad is going to be dwindling. And Snakewater does have a good dry or a fast transition Uber door, which is through lower lobby, just straight through lower. Very fast to get in, and you can just pop through this door and bomb whatever side. And you know, that's your Uber. It gets in very fast, which is kind of the point with something like that. Yeah, and if it's really thin margins, you might be more inclined to use through. You have to be very careful with this, though, because you don't want to be caught in a situation in which it's such slim Ubers that they can just, like, well, you hate to be in a situation where it's just straight up evens and they get to pop back. Usually those are pretty salvageable as long as, like, everyone's baiting adequately, because you can usually have enough Uber to, like, flash your demo and have them try and jump out and maybe get out with your scout. You might, like, lose a demo or something, which is bad, but it could be worse as long as, you know, everyone on the team is adequately baiting. But of course it is bad. You don't want to just use through if it's even Ubers. But it might be a situation in which you get just enough space initially, but as they're leaving, like maybe they're at like 90% already, and you're not going to expect to be able to just cap the point by the time they get Uber. If you're stacking your combo on the point, then not only are you caught to a repop, but you're encouraging a repop because you're conveying like a ×5, ×7, whatever on the point. They know that you're all on the point. They know their Uber is going to be guaranteed like really good, and they're going to want to repop out anyway to stop the point. So you have to be very careful of that. Maybe just leave a scout capping and immediately get your combo somewhere safe. And hopefully you can still get the point before they use through or something like that, but you never know. So with thin Uber margins, you definitely have to be careful about how fast they can repop out. But as long as you're staying on top of that, then it's usually preferred to pop through on those slim margins rather than dry. Because let's imagine it's 20 ad, right? If I were to pop through saw and then maybe you don't get anything, right? Not worst case scenario because you're not losing anyone, but you know, pretty average case scenario, kind of meh. Flip-flop. You don't get anything. You're expecting them to be at 80% when you use ins. You're expecting them to be around 90% as the time, like by the time that your Uber's ending and things are settling down. So you get your combo to safety through lower or something, leave a guy to cap, and then let's say you get the cap, and yeah, you're just in a situation where it's just a flip-flop, right? Because they now have the ad. Maybe people aren't in such great positions as they could have been if it was more like 40 ad. But, I mean, you still survived in the end. Like, you're still kind of playing that same type of scenario that you were looking for. Versus if it's 20 ad and you start trying to dry lower, you have to be careful about this because if... like, their med knows how much Uber they have. Since dry pushing is, like, much slower than just popping through, if this med is at 80%, they know that there's a decent chance they just kind of get here by the time you guys even make it to point. And they might be calling that. They might be intentionally not sacking a player because they don't want to be down one for what is about to be an exchange on point, and then they Uber exchange. And I have an entire video talking about exchanges and why you want to go for them and stuff like that if you're wondering why they would want to exchange there. But yeah, they might be playing for that exchange instead, and if you're too slow because it's a dry push, there might be situations in which you're able to force out a team at a certain Uber margin that you would end up instead be looking at an exchange if it was just a dry push instead. So yeah, you have to be careful with that. A little side note on that is if you actually start moving at like 80% rather than as you have, then that med is going to be at, we were imagining 20 ad. Let's say like it was 15. You're not going to dry push Snakewater lower on 15 ad, but let's say, yeah, 20 ad. They're going to be at 60%, so they're going to be like, yeah, we're nowhere near getting, we have to leave. But if that med is like a super Chad, just tracking Ubers perfectly, and they know that you don't have yet and you're at 80%, then they could totally hold this door as if it's evens and then only back out when the Uber threat is real. So you have to like look out for that kind of metagame back and forth type of scenario. But by and large, yeah, going a little bit earlier before you have Uber for a dry push is generally better, gives you better returns. Things even out less frequently. Okay, so that's how the Uber margins come into the decision-making process. Oh, and another thing as well, it doesn't even have to be add into last. If you have like an insane amount of add, it might be worth going for a dry push just because you have enough add to potentially get multiple points out of it, right? Versus like if it's 80 add and we decide to just pop through Saw, then we're really conceding to only getting this point, assuming you don't get any picks that you can keep pressuring forward with. You're basically converting 80 add into 1 point versus you can take a dry push. It can be a pretty slow dry push as well. And let's say that 80 add has now dwindled to, let's say, 40, let's say 30 add, right? Takes you 50% just to get the 1 point. You could fast transition that 30 add into a flip-flop on the other point, and effectively get like a 1.5 or a point and a flip-flop on the next one. And if you're like fast enough, then you can potentially dry multiple points, dry and flip-flop, mix it up depending on your taste and how you're feeling, and the situation at hand. But point being, if you have a ton of add, you might be more enticed to dry push just because you might be able to get multiple points out of it. Another side note as well. This is kind of, I thought I would be able to seamlessly fit this in, but the reason we're on Snakewater is because it's very distinct when it comes to a dry push versus a pop through, at least on 2. With your door selection does matter quite a bit. Usually with a dry push, you want a door that is very safe to get through and very far away from where their combo is. So lower is like the dryable door, usually, getting into grass here. Because their combo is so far away, because you can just see exactly where their bombs are coming from, assuming your flank has saw control, which they should, it's just very easy to take space through. A very dryable door. Versus Saw is a door you can totally dry through if you wanted to, but it's just not as effective for the task. But it makes for a much better pop through door because it's closer to their combo. You can potentially even wrap lobby if they're trying to leave lobby and catch players out. It's just much closer, so it's easier to catch people as a result. So that kind of those kinds of differences you see kind of repeated throughout, where teams will prefer to pop through a door that's closer to where the enemy combo holds, closer to where you might be able to catch people, and then the preferred dry door is the one that's kind of further away. But yeah, I figure I'd just mention that side note. Next, we're going to talk about, so we talked about how Uber margins factor in. We're going to talk about how picks factor in. Because you're not always going to be in a situation in which everyone is alive on both teams and, one team has add. A lot of the time, a team is going to have add and might be down players, or or the defending team is down players with dis add, stuff like this. And let's talk about how that factors into your decision making. So, first and foremost, if you have add and you're down, let's say 1 player, then you have to be concerned about a flank shove. And Snakewater is a pretty flank active map, which you might have to worry about this as well. So it serves as a decent example. Basically, as you push in, their flank, which is 2 players, is going to be pushing into your flank, which is going to be 1 player, right? Because even if, let's say, your pocket scout died or pocket soldier died, then the roamer or flank scout are going to need to rotate over for the push, because you're still going to need a soldier to get space if you're trying to dry, and you're still going to need a scout to be with the medic if you try and push. And this applies to a pop through as well. Like, you're still probably going to want a soldier kind of buffed near the combo, ready to collapse on players. So you're expecting your flank to only be 1 player, right? which is fine for spotting it, but not fine for holding it. So that 2v1 is not going to be good for them. And that's basically what the other team's trying to do, right? They're trying to isolate a 2v1, kill that player, and get behind. Usually threaten back caps, bring you guys back, just cause bad problems. So that's something you have to be really aware of. It's not really... I don't think you should just call things off every time you're down one, but you definitely need that flank member to be very aware of that threat, and your combo needs to be aware of it as well, ready to, you know, react if there is a back cap to either turn and stop that and collect those 2 picks, and then like try and fight forward, you know, basically approach it, you know, situation by situation. Maybe the player that was dead was like on a really... They were about to spawn imminently, and then they can actually be able to stop the back cap with the other flank member. Yeah, basically just have a dialogue, talk things out, figure out the situation specifically. But flank shoves are a big deal that can happen when you're down a player like that. Down 2 players, it's kind of sketch to just take the Uber at all. It's totally possible, and especially like if they're just really aggro and caught, then if you can get picks, it's going to be worth. But a lot of the time, you have to be very worried about that. And this also applies to being like down a demo or something. You can still totally take an Uber if need be, but it's just going to be much less effective. There's not going to be anyone to like lock out any doors, but you could incorporate like a soldier as the bombing explosive class to potentially catch players. It's just something you have to be very careful of. Basically, point being, if you're down players, then flip-flopping just sucks a little bit more. In many cases, it's still very doable, but it can be tough against a team of everyone alive. On the flip side, if the other team is down a bunch of players, then kind of the reverse happens, where, I mean, obviously it's just better for you, but it also encourages dry fighting more so than a pop-through. Because what a pop-through is really looking for is just space and picks, if possible. You already have the picks, so it's just not... Like, the point is not going to be held that properly. So the downside of a dry fight, of being more vulnerable to a sack and more vulnerable to spam, and being slower, those kind of start to melt away, because who is going to be spamming? There's a decent chance they just don't even sack if they're down multiple players. And you can go much faster if they're down multiple players. Of course, if they're like down a soldier, you literally only need to spot one soldier, and then you know exactly where a bomb could possibly come from. And you just don't have to worry about that threat anymore. If they're down a demo, you know they don't have any traps, and you just don't have to clear any traps. Stuff like that will really speed up a dry push. So if the other team is down players, then dry pushing is much better than it would be normally. So that definitely factors into your decision making there. Okay, what is next? Let's talk about enemy positioning. I already talked about how, you know, people would position on second as an example. Not everyone plays, you know, proper disad positioning. Some people are just out of position, and some people are playing just really aggressive spam. So if I'm a demo, like holding on point here against ad, I am really caught to an Uber. But if they, instead of using into me, just try to like push through a door, they're almost certainly going to have to use, because I'm in a position to do enough damage to just, you know, annihilate them, right? But again, I'm caught to an Uber. Versus if I was playing to leave kitchen, or let's say playing to leave saw, very much not caught to an Uber, but very much incapable of actually denying a doorway, right? So the kind of soft counter to dry pushes, or what can cause a lot of issues for dry pushes that insist on not using Uber, is players just kind of being caught to Ubers, kind of being too aggro, just playing really nasty spam. It can be very difficult to get through a door. And the solution there is to start just popping through and killing those players that are caught to the Ubers. Basically, there's kind of like a, not dichotomy, maybe dichotomy. Either the other team is caught to an Uber, and a dry push is going to be very difficult because they're so forward, or they're just not caught at all and playing super passive, and a dry push is going to be really easy. So identifying, you know, where the enemies are positioned is going to be really important for what you choose to do. And on this note, it's really important when you take a dry push that the be-all end-all is not to not use Uber. The be-all end-all is to get the point, right? There are going to be times where a call is to try and dry through a certain door, and there are going to be players way too aggressive and potentially just caught in that door. Immediately your plan should change to then go use and catch those players. I know this sounds so simple, right? You're trying to dry, oh, their entire combo is caught, to like a team wiping Uber. Well, of course you just use the Uber. But a lot of the time, people insist on just drying and think they can spam these guys out. Like literally just simplify your life, just use that Uber if they're caught, and then, you know, move on. You're happy. And being comfortable with taking flip-flops regularly will help you identify these situations, will help you be more ready to just call to use and then catch those players and be happy. Right. And because of this kind of relationship between the enemy positioning and what they might be more or less vulnerable to, as far as a dry push versus a pop through, you can condition your opponents, right? So, I mean, I've talked about situations in which like a dry push just makes way more sense, like when you have so much ad or like a ton of picks that the point's going to be free anyway, and then you can take points past that. Stuff like that, like sure, there might be an obvious answer. Or when they're like so caught that you just kind of have to use the Uber and kill them all. Stuff like that, it's very objective, like which one's better than the other. For most Ubers, it's going to be kind of either or. If you have 50 ad, everyone's alive, you could pop through, and you could also dry. It's really up to you. And in those situations, what you choose might condition your opponents to do a certain thing. If you always dry catwalk when you have ad and it's even players, you might expect it to start getting trapped more, and you might expect a soldier to, you know, play a different position that's better at bombing that, that might be more vulnerable to like saw pressure or something like that. Basically, what you do is going to condition your opponent, and if you pop through a lot or more than you maybe think you should, or more than you're used to normally, you're going to very much condition your opponents to be playing that scared disad positioning, and then your drive pushes are going to be much better as a result. So being able to mix the two together, be unpredictable with your ads, and essentially like force your opponents into respecting the fact that you have Uber is going to be more effective than just being very predictable and doing the same thing over and over again, and hoping that, you know, it's going to work. And that goes both ways as well. If your default plan is to pop through in those kind of, you know, either or situations, which it's totally fine for that to be your default plan most of the time. But if you just stop getting any value on the bombs and no one's ever caught, and you're not really seeing any of the value of the flip-flops, it's mostly just pretty neutral situations, then maybe start peppering in more dries, because chances are that's because they're just playing very passively, and you should be able to dry easier. I think that's all I have to say about the dry push versus flip-flop kind of metagaming. Yeah, I think, to reiterate, because it was kind of the point of me making this to begin with, in lower divisions, popping through is way better than it is normally. Not it's way better than dry pushes, which still totally have their place, but a lot of people kind of just assume that it's better to dry push, and it's really not. Especially if you get good at, not even get good, get familiar as a team with flip-flop situations, then in many cases it will be better than dry pushes, and it's just a really potent plan to have. Yeah. it's just good, and you know, overinflated value in lower divs. But yeah, that's basically like the interactions between the dry push and a flip flop. When you might want to go for one over the other. For most of them, it does come down to kind of vibes, but I'm a big flip flop enjoyer. I have been experimenting with them more, you know, in the past few seasons, I suppose. And it's really enjoyable, really simple plan to follow, and yeah, I like them. So that is all I have to say here. Don't only dry push, don't only pop through, and know why you're doing one or the other. Pick the right door. All that stuff I've talked about. I don't need to reiterate. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope this was useful, and I'll see you guys next time.